Hello and welcome to Food Safety Fridays. I think my video is freezing, but I hope you can hear me. Today, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Rob Mancini, Internal Audit Manager from Rocket. Rob's first time with us. How are you doing, Rob? Morning.
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Whereabouts are you joining us from today, Rob?
Lovely Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. So it's quite cold. I hope everyone's staying nice and warm because I'm freezing.
Yeah, it looks nice and bright though. So
it does.
A nice crisp cold day. And I'm in the UK in Manchester in the north of England. Wherever you're from, you're very welcome. Tell us where you are from in the sidebar. We're always delighted to see. Let's have a quick look. Dr. Nurali from Iran, Michael from Texas, Greece, Jason from New Hampshire. Literally, you won't see a country not represented at Food Safety Friday. So you're all very welcome. I'm going to play the sponsor ads now, and we'll be back for Rob's presentation in a couple of minutes. Okay, ready for the presentation? I'll hand you over to Rob. I'll be back for the Q&A later, but for now, yeah, ready for the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm so glad you're able to join us, and I know everyone's busy, so I will try to keep this as short and sweet as possible. I am Italian, so I apologize. So I like to talk quite a bit, but we'll try to condense this. We'll try to make this short as much as possible. What I really want to focus on is learning and behavior science and food safety. I want to concentrate even more on the learning part and discuss some of the techniques that have been elicited in terms of behavior. And a lot of the work was already conducted by our famous food expert, Frank Yanis, and so on. But I also believe that the way we learn is equally as important because we have to know the information first and then elicit the behavior afterwards. So I do apologize because I'm currently working from home, and my youngest son finds it quite amusing to take his brand new Nerf gun and shoot me. So if you hear any sounds or anything in the background, that's just my little boy shooting me with his gun. The knowledge is there because I've told him that this is not nice and it hurts his father. It's not good. I'm doing a presentation. But obviously the behavior is not there. So I needed to throw in an incentive. And I did explain that we'd go out for ice cream afterwards. Still didn't work. So I'm going to need to really work on my behavioral science techniques and see what we can do to do that and implement that. But when it comes to training, I recall my mother. My family's from Italy. And my mother was forced to take this food safety training course here in Canada. And the course is 8 hours long. And it's a PowerPoint presentation with a presenter. English was a second language for my mother. She's a very smart lady. When she came home, I remember how distraught she was because there were so many terms and so many concepts that she needed to remember that, given in English, it was very, very difficult to start off with. And watching a PowerPoint presentation for 8 hours was really, in my opinion, quite pointless, and it didn't really drive home the point. So this is where embarked me on my journey on training and learning. And I worked with Doug Powell to do a graduate degree on behavioral science and learning using on-site hands-on training for different companies, and Folklorama, which is one of the largest running pavilions here in Manitoba, which is a festival. Anyways, I'm going to continue on, but what I'd like to know is, how often do we actually speak to our frontline staff and develop a needs assessment? What I'm saying is, do we either push training or do we pull training? So are we asking, what exactly is it that they require, or are we just pushing training just to tick off a box? Okay, so why do we do this training? Food safety training, it's seen obviously as an integral component in our public health system, and it's designed to reduce foodborne outbreaks. And food safety training and certification of managers have been used as a method to reduce food safety violations in food service facilities. That being said, the literature is very inconclusive on the effectiveness of the different training programs that are out there. Typically, we see these training courses as either classroom-based training seminars that are varied in length, usually 8 hours, and sometimes even in US 16 hours, or computer-based programs, e-learning programs as well. They always claim, or researchers always claim, that the best mode of training is hands-on, on-the-job type of training, but we rarely see this conducted, and it's not been documented well in the literature. We tend to adopt what we call the CAP model, K-A-P, which has become really synonymous with health education, and it assumes that an individual's behaviors is dependent upon knowledge alone, and the mere provision of knowledge will translate into positive attitudes and behaviors. This model has been heavily criticized for its limitations. It's accepted that knowledge alone is insufficient to trigger positive practices. So we really need to focus on how we impart that knowledge first, because if that's not effective, we can't move over to the behavioral part. So it's really important that we look at the different training models out there and develop a needs assessment. We also know that adult learners learn best when they're actively involved in the learning process. That retention by participants is directly affected by the amount of practice during the learning. Not just listening to information, but actually applying it and practicing it. So you do that repetition. So it's absolutely important to do that. But yet, traditionally, food safety training courses, they're not delivered in this fashion. And for a lot of training courses, they're not effectively evaluated. And although positive responses we've seen towards the knowledge of good hygiene practices has not been indicated, doesn't necessarily translate into positive behaviors. So we really need to look at actively involving our students, our participants in the work in order for us to be effective. There's my little boy right there who's ready to shoot me with the Nerf gun. But anyways, this comes from Frank Yanis's book, I Hear and I Forget, I See and I Remember, I Do and I Understand. So it's that hands-on approach that we implement something that's physically hands-on so that the individuals participate and they get used to it. Now, there's a massive difference between what we call food safety education. And again, this doesn't necessarily just have to dwell on food safety. It could be with anything. But there's a difference between food safety education, which is essentially your classroom-based programs, and food safety training. Education involves the transfer of information to another. So danger zone, how to use a thermometer, how to do dishwashing, and all that fun stuff, which is extremely important. But food safety training, on the other hand, is how do we do something? And it's generally hands-on, and more preferably, it should be in the work environment. Both are extremely important to be incorporated in an effective program, but this doesn't really happen. Or when it does happen, it's not done properly, okay? And we also have to consider English as second language students. Sorry, I talk so much, I just need a little bit of water here. English as second language students, we have to consider that there are multitude of factors to consider in terms of food safety training. Who's your audience? How many ESL students are present, and how many millennials have been out of school for over plus 30 years or so, right? They're going to learn differently. It's different. They're more nervous. They haven't been used to the system for a while. So we need to really cater to that. It's extremely important that we keep things simple and to the point. Understand the concept and how to apply it in real life situations. This is absolutely critical for retrieval. And I'll come back to this point a little bit later on. A lot of people, we have to realize that a lot of people are shy and they will rarely ask for clarification during the course. We need to keep this in mind, and we really need to address why we're doing the training to make sure they really understand it. And if you speak to anyone in education, in particular with English as second language students, you must make thought and concepts visible through pictures, drawings, practical reinforcement. Of course, it'd be best to deliver the course in their own language, but we have to also look at practicality as well. There's always the consideration of time. A lot of these courses are extremely long, 8 hours, 16 hours, 4 hours, and so on. Less can be more if it's done effectively. So we shouldn't be worrying about time. We seem to get fixated on how long a course should run, or perhaps spend more time on practice, which would be more important. It's not about the time. Training should be delivered in an efficient, effective manner. And I'm going to get into shortly micro training and some little snippets, how more importantly it's more powerful than to just listen to someone speak for an extended period of time, like you're listening to me now speak for an extended period of time. But it's more powerful to implement micro learning, micro training, okay? Because we have to realize too that the adult attention span is extremely low. Mine's even lower. So we have to consider that and take that into consideration, because we're going to lose our audience. And how effective will our training be if we continue to talk and continue to bombard the individuals or the masses with PowerPoint slides when they're not going to be listening? We are constantly bombarded by our phones, by work, by a whole bunch of different avenues, and we're just constantly being pulled. So we need to keep things very micro, to the point. And then we need to consider repetitions of that point, which I'm going to get into later, which is really the primary objective of this presentation. So there are many researchers in the field or in the realm of food safety training who insist that the courses must be hands-on, or at very least involve a component that's hands-on, but we rarely see that done. Moving on. All right, so this, I remember Doug Powell, he's the professor that I used to work for. He was the one that really changed my perspective on how effective training can be. This is something that Frank Yanis also had highlighted in his book, in behavior-based training. It's sometimes you really need to put a face to the story. It's more impactful, because a lot of times what we do is we keep relaying, or we keep talking about high statistical numbers. How many people get foodborne illness? How many outbreaks have occurred? Okay, on and on and on. But when you actually put a face to the, or you put a name to the face, or you actually show something that has happened, it's far more impactful. And in particular, if any one of us or any one of you have kids, it's extremely impactful. So in this case here, this young child died at 5 years old, hemolytic uremic syndrome from E. coli. Absolutely horrific. And I remember doing a presentation for a prominent group of nurses, doctors, and public. There were about 1,000 people or so, and it was quite a chatty group. Anyways, I put up this slide, and I explained the situation, and I did put up another picture that was somewhat more graphic, but you could hear the pin drop of a needle. That's how quiet it became, because people started to really listen. Because when you start talking about stories, real life stories, and you start putting pictures or you start putting names to faces, it becomes real. So this is what they call power of one. So when you're training, this is more powerful, and the masses are likely to remember this than just numbers. Okay, now, yeah, humans are complex. We know this. But through the use of right certified equipment and designing sound quality food retail systems, a lot of facilities were able to significantly reduce food safety risks. Great. And we do follow different standards, FSSC 22000 or BRC or whatever the case is. But there's always that one rogue element. And that's humans. We're different. We're complex. Regardless of the sanitary environment in which we are working, we still contribute to the greatest risk to food environments. The prescribed solution is really to mitigate this risk is to ensure that individuals are given the time, the tools, and the proper training necessary to facilitate proper food handling practices. We have to remember, people are dynamic. We don't simply do what we're told. We are stubborn this way, okay? And we can't be programmed like a computer to perfectly perform at all times. It doesn't work that way. So only by affecting change in food handler behaviors will we be successful in embedding food safety within our organizational culture. Everyone is different, and a one-all-be-all training platform will not work. You need to be creative. You need to be innovative, and you have to understand what exactly is going to work for the audience you're presenting to. All right, there are two facets that I want to discuss first. One, you need to learn the information. Right? That's the education part. You need to know the information. Number two, you need to apply that information, which is the behavioral part of it all. Both have their challenges. We have to remember, as food safety experts or experts in our field, we know the information and we can easily relay the information. But let's not be fools, because we're not instructional designers, we're not marketers, and in my opinion, the way we present the information and how we do it using learning principles and using behavioral techniques is far more important, okay? So having the proper instructional design is important. And there are many facets to this. It's not as simple as we think, including psychometrics when it comes to exam development or quiz development. It's very easy for us to develop a multiple choice question, but is it evaluated? Has it been done properly? There are many, many, many facets when it comes to psychometrics, and it's important that we have someone with the expertise to evaluate those multiple choice questions, make sure we're doing it properly. It's incredible what can happen when you work with marketers, when you work with behavioral science, when you work with psychologists, and so on. The next time you fly, depending on the airline that you're flying with, take a look at their safety videos. Take a look at their safety videos. You'll see now how innovative they've become, because they've realized that they're boring and people are not engaged and they're not innovative, then no one's going to listen. But now the amount of marketing, the amount of behavioral techniques that have gone into them, they're absolutely engaging. And they've done a great job on different types of videos. This is what we need to do to keep people's attention, right? You need to make it compelling. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Okay, so this is from one of my favorite experts out there, Will Tallmeyer. This is from a paper that he had written, and he's a learning and development specialist expert. And what he does is he looks at the research out there in the field and he makes it, for us laymen's, makes it somewhat easier to read and somewhat easier to understand. So what I want to discuss here is learning first. How do we learn? Do you remember your mom's birthday? You don't have to respond in the chat or anything. Sure, it's easier. Do you remember your mother-in-law's birthday? No, it's a little bit more difficult. So how do we elicit that memory? How do we spark that memory in our brains and get those neurons functioning so we can remember certain things? I'm going to discuss one of the most prominent and most highly researched phenomenon in learning and development history. And it, to this day, is the best way to learn. And I'll get, that's my little teaser for you to stick around for the presentation, and then we'll get to that. But learning is not a one-dimensional process. You need different cognitive supports when they're new to learning, okay? And different instructional supports are needed in different phases of learning. First, what we need to do is build their understanding. So as learners are new to material, the most important thing we can do is support them in building the understanding of the topic. Do not overload the working memory capacity. Keep training short, to the point. Micro-learning is far more powerful than extended learning. Then what we need to do is implement what we call the spacing effect. That's what I want to get into shortly. So hold on and we'll talk about what the spacing effect is. Break down the lessons again into micro lessons, small snippets. Assist the learners in testing their knowledge. We have to implement the retrieval. We need to see if they understand the material. And we also need to have our courses evaluated. And by doing certain retrieval exercises within the course, not just at the very end of the course, it really makes a difference on memory. And we have to provide working examples, real life examples, something that they're going to see in the future in their work environment. Then number 2 is we need to support retrieval. After learners get the basic concepts, we can provide them with the retrieval practice to increase the likelihood they'll be able to retrieve that information in the future. Only after the learners have attempted to retrieve information do we provide the feedback. Then it becomes more powerful. It's so powerful, retrieval, that they've coined the term testing effect. The best retrieval practice events are designed to mirror future retrieval situations. So real life. So you can have examples within a classroom on maybe perhaps a different case study, but it has to relate to what they're going to see in their work environment, okay? Because that's where we want them to apply the knowledge and eventually behavioral change. So real world practice and simulations are powerful because they utilize realistic retrieval practice. Then we need to really develop the fluency. So give our learners additional practice to automate the retrieval. That is extremely important as well. Now, if there's only one thing you take out of this seminar, aside from my loud voice and my extensive talking, is what we call the spacing effect. The spacing effect, and this is a quote from Barrick and Hall, spacing effect is one of the oldest and best documented phenomena in the history of learning and memory research. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this technique, but it's been the most researched phenomenon and extremely the most powerful. And when it comes to learning, it is the one thing that we need to implement. And a lot of times, honestly, we have been doing this, we just didn't realize what it was. So what is the spacing effect then? When we talk about the spacing effect, we're talking about spacing repetitions of learning points over time. It occurs when we present the learners with a concept to learn, we wait some amount of time, and then we present the same concept again. It can involve a few repetitions or many repetitions. Repetitions as well can be in different formats, okay? So it can be verbatim repetitions. What is the temperature danger zone? In Canada, we use Celsius, so between 4 and 60 degrees. Okay, now we repeat that. We wait a certain amount of time and we repeat it. And how you do it, this is where we become extremely innovative and creative. So you can use verbatim repetitions, paraphrased repetitions, changing the word just slightly, stories, examples, demonstrations, illustrations, metaphors, and other ways of providing context and example, testing, practice, exercises, simulations, case studies, and so on. Even discussions, debates, different ways and different modalities on how we deliver that certain point. But as long as it's repeated after a certain amount of time, that's how we start to learn. That's how we start to remember, okay? Repetitions can also be delivered to different perceptual modalities. So it could be visual, auditory, olfactory, kinesthetic, hands-on, which is extremely important, and through different learning media. Regardless of the way these repetitions are manifested, if 2 or more presentations of the same learning part are repeated with some sort of delay between them, they are likely to produce what we call the spacing effect. Okay, so on the side, I like to play violin. I really hate Paganini. And if anyone knows, or if anyone is familiar with music, especially when it comes to violin, Paganini is not easy to play. So, and typically when we do play these pieces, you have to memorize them. And you can just see how black the page is. And there's a lot of notes and it's a lot of difficulty. How do people play these, memorize them, and continue to play them? Why? Because we implement what we call the spacing effect. We repeat. So you play the first line, okay? You play it once, you play it twice, wait a few more days, go back, do it again, then go on to the second line, wait a few more days, go back to the first line, and keep going. At the very end, if you implement the spacing effect, which a lot of musicians do, by the way, and they just don't realize it, which includes the repetitions over time, you will memorize that and it will be completely encoded in your brain. And it will be very difficult for you to forget it because you're using your brain, first of all, Your neurons are going to be encoded to memorize this. And secondly, using muscle memory as well. So the more you repeat it with a delay in between, the better there is. And there are different multitude of different ways we can do this. Really, it's not that difficult, but we just need to be pragmatic on how we do this and to understand how much of a delay we need in between and when to repeat, okay? Now, I'm not going to get too far into detail with this, but I do hate Paganini, just for that reason alone. Okay, so this is essentially what the spacing effect does. This is, you can see on the left, you can see the projected forgetting curve. So you can see on the very left how the projected forgetting curve goes right down to the very bottom. And then you can see with the first reminder that, hey, look, okay, we can see something progressing, second reminder, third reminder, and the fourth reminder. So the more we repeat over time, the likelihood of us remembering is far greater. It's, if you remember back in, well, it depends on your age, but for me, when I went back in university and high school, what we typically do and how training is typically conducted nowadays is we cram. I mean, you get them, you're presented with information, you study that information for that one day, you write a quiz or you take a test, and that's it. You are then going to start forgetting because the points are not being repeated. It's not, you're not going to remember certain concepts any longer. It doesn't work that way. We shouldn't be cramming. We have to remember, everyone, that learning takes place over time. We cannot consider learning a one-time event. It takes place over time, okay? So instead of having a short-term memory, Spark, we need to have that long-term memory, more permanent storage, and spacing effect is how we do that. But what causes the spacing effect? It's still being researched on what really causes spacing effect. All we know is that it works. That we know that wider spacings require extra cognitive effort, and such effort creates stronger memory traces and better remembering. The spacing creates memory traces that are more varied than narrow spacings, creating multiple retrieval routes that aid memory. So you're going to think of it differently and just creating different patterns. And that the wider spacings produce more forgetting during learning, prompting learners to use different and more effective encoding strategies that aid remembering in the future. Okay, and for some reason, and we don't know why, researchers don't know why, having a good night's sleep after reviewing information really, really helps, and it's very beneficial when it comes to the spacing technique. And what I spoke about earlier here, if I go to my previous slide with I hate Paganini, here, when I was talking about repeating, so learning the first line, then learning the second line, wait a few days, perhaps a week, go back and do it again. That in learning theory is called interleaving. So we do that, and we can even implement that when we're doing our training. Okay, and they're very, very, there are different techniques on how to implement that. This is just showing you, again, this is just the forgetting curve and remembering on the job. You can see that learning and forgetting with spacing on the job on the right-hand side, spaced learning on the job. Oh, my apologies. My work seems to be bugging me right now. But spaced learning on the job turns the forgetting curve into learning and forgetting curve, improving memory. Because when we forget something, when we relearn it, you remember. So forgetting is a good thing because then you use multiple retrieval routes to try to remember again. So you go back to the material. Now you're not going to forget it. And there are many different techniques we can use, but spacing is by far the most important. But here, I got a question for you. I'm not sure how we're really going to do this, but an instructional designer wants to develop a course for food safety managers. 15 hours of class are required. Which schedule of learning will produce the most highly skilled presenters? Is it A, 1 week, 8 hours on Monday, 7 hours on Friday? B, 1 week, Monday through Friday, 3 hours each day? C, 2 weeks, Monday through Friday, 1.5 hours each day? D, all the designs will be equally effective. And E, choices B and C will produce similar results. I can open up the chat here just to see what the flavor is. So what do you think? What's going to produce the most impactful training? I'm certain it's going to be quite varied, the answers. And you know what, just to save in terms of time and so on, because like I said, I do like to speak quite a bit, the answer would actually be C. 2 weeks, Monday through Friday, 1.5 hours each day. Short micro-learning and implementing spacing. Okay, let's talk about, again, this is not something new to anyone, but this is from more Frank Yanis's book in terms of types of behavior. So now that we have the learning, the knowledge, and we implemented the spacing effect, and there's many different ways of doing it. If those of you that work in a plant or the food service industry, there's a real opportunity for performance coaching. So by you elicit or you have individuals take a course, then you go out into the field and you actually reiterate the important parts of that course. That is implementing the spacing effect in a different modality. It's the same thing by what we did in my company at Roquette. I work for a plant-based company. What we did was we implemented a Gemba walk. So we would know what training was conducted the week prior or whatever, and then we would use the opportunity of going out to do a Gemba, and we would reiterate certain points of that to really, again, add that repetition. It really makes a difference, and there's different ways of doing it. You can send an online quiz. You can send a case study. You can send a reminder. You can be so creative when it comes to this. You can even do morning huddles to reiterate certain parts. No matter what we do, as long as we repeat the information. Or you can have a learning event, then a few days later or a week later, have just a small little learning event or a small online course that you can push onto the audience so they can take it. Then perhaps a quiz and so on. And you keep it going. There are many companies now that are starting to pick up on this, and they're starting to implement spacing in their training programs. So it's extremely important that we get on board because we know it works. There's no question. Is anyone familiar with this font? It's the serif. So a lot of times when individuals are writing standard operating procedures, I work for a plant, so I've done many standard operating procedures in quality, food safety. I've seen some for health and safety and so on. Something as simple as just changing the font. And you can see with this font here with the serif, you can see the line on the bottom. It just makes it easier to read. So as opposed to focusing on the information that's there or trying to read the information, you're now more focusing on the intent of the information. So you're not just trying to read. Now you can actually focus more on the intent. Why? Just by changing the font. It's absolutely incredible, and it costs nothing to do. The power of why. This is simple. This is, I mean, I used to work as a health inspector for many years, and actually did don't laugh, everyone, audience. I actually did a TV show for the Food Network and Home Garden TV on food safety. And I remember my directors telling me this and saying, okay, it's one thing, Rob, that you can tell them to do something. So what we did is we went into people's homes, we raided their homes, and I literally scared them because I would take swab samples and food samples and say, this is what you got, and this is what you need to do. But I remember the director saying, you know what, Rob, it's going to be more impactful if you actually explain why that's important and what is going to be the impact if they don't do this. There have been many studies that have been conducted by just simply saying why you're doing something will be more impactful, and you'll get the audience participation and you'll get compliance. Okay, and a lot of us do this. A lot of inspectors will do this. We'll say, hey, you need to use that probe thermometer, or you need to make sure that sanitizers at the right concentration. But we often miss why it's important. People need to know why in order for them to understand. So simply by just explaining the why will make a massive, massive difference. Marketing and advertising. Position images and graphics on the left. Something so simple. What I typically see on PowerPoint presentations is the opposite, which really doesn't work. But when you perceive stimuli toward one side of your field of vision, the opposing hemisphere processes that, and vice versa. Because the right hemisphere is better suited to process pictures, and the left is typically more verbal, logical reasoning, then pictures should always be placed on the left of your slides. Again, something so simple and something so impactful. So you can see it here on the right-hand side. By putting the picture on the left will make more of an impact because your right hemisphere will process it. Again, we may be experts in food safety, but we have to also look at marketers, instructional designers, psychologists, behavioral scientists, and so on certain small little techniques that are effective and that work. So this on your PowerPoint, the next time you create a PowerPoint presentation, if you want to make things impactful, something as simple as doing that. Even throwing your logo of your company, doing that. And if you put too much of that logo there, people are gonna, because a lot of times what I see is I'll see PowerPoint slides and they'll have the logo of their company absolutely on every slide. That diminishes the impact. You need to have it once and have it positioned properly, and you'll see what that can do. Switch sides here. Power of storytelling. This is a no-brainer. I mean, we as humans, our brains are hardwired to process and store information in the form of stories. This is the way it's catnip to the human mind. This is the way we grew up, right? Once upon a time. So the more storytelling you do during a presentation, more real-life storytelling, as opposed to just relaying information, the more impactful it's going to be. Academics and marketers alike have found that our brains have been hardwired to process and store information in the form of stories. You'll remember these stories, okay? So when we hear that once upon a time, for instance, there was that certain character in such and such a place, our minds are immediately transported to that imaginary scene. So immerse your audience in the story. Tell a personal story. I remember doing a presentation for, okay, so Doug Powell was very hard on me. He was an amazing, amazing man. And as part of my course, or part of my master's degree, I had to do quite a few presentations for him. And he would tune right out when I was talking about certain scientific things or whatever we were talking about. But as soon as I mentioned the story, that's when he sparked back and he goes, now I'm starting to listen to what you're talking about. And he's absolutely right. So immerse your audience in the story, tell a personal story, create suspense, bring characters to life, show, don't tell. So show stuff, get them to do some more hands-on work, okay? And tell stories behind it. If we do have some time, I'll just relay quickly the study that we did using hands-on training as well. Principle of consistency and commitment. Again, this is not nothing new. This is again from Frank Yanis's book, but you know what? It works. And those of you that have not read the book, it's extremely powerful. And here I'll just relay some information. So principle of consistency and commitment. People want to behave in a way that is consistent with their beliefs and values. Inconsistency is a socially undesirable trait. So if a person has stated their beliefs publicly or in a written comment or commitment, the ideas and behaviors will be consistent with that commitment. So there's the example that Frank gives. There's a 30% cancellation rate at a restaurant, and the attendant would say, please call if you change your plans. By adding a commitment factor, they decrease the cancellation rate from 30% to 10% by simply saying, instead of, please call if you change your plans, to, will you please call if you change your plans, pause. Wait for that commitment, and that will make a significant difference. I have personally tried this on my wife, don't tell anybody, and it works. Because I've always asked, can we please have a steak tonight? The answer is always no. Will you please allow me to have a steak tonight? Pause, wait, it works. It really does. It's exciting. And I'm like, okay, now we can have some steak. In terms of commitment as well, whenever you are conducting a learning event or a training event, have them sign off a commitment statement. It's very simple. At the very end of it, I commit to following these learning principles or this training. As soon as they sign, it's that commitment on their end, and that's what's going to drive compliance. Principle of social norm, we know this. If one person is standing on the street corner and looks up, 40% of the individuals will do the exact same. It's crazy, but it happens. Now you have multiple people standing on the corner and they're all looking up. 85% will be looking up. It could be absolutely nothing. So as Frank had mentioned too in his book, there's the tendency for us humans to really mimic each other. It's called the social norm. We really do want to. So if you want to be impactful, be the food safety champion in your facility. You know, if you're not washing hands, we always say this, and managers, if they're not displaying proper food safety practices, like washing their hands when they walk in back of house so that everybody can see this, then it's not going to be effective. Okay, so we want to try to have some sort of food safety champion group used to influence people, because people are, they want to mimic each other, which humans are extremely complex that way and somewhat simple in another way, but it's really interesting. And then there's neural encoding, of course, rhyming. Your burger is done at 71. People will tend to remember this because it rhymes and it neurally encodes that into your brain. So whatever you can do to make your training more impactful by adding a certain rhyme or anything at all, it will make it more impactful. People will remember those kind of things. There are many, many, many different other techniques out there, but I do encourage you to read the book. But in conclusion, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So start with smaller, shorter pieces of information. Your brain limits new information to 5 to 7 pieces maximum. Micro-learning and implementing the spacing technique will elicit the knowledge. Then really, really, really go to marketers, instructional designers, psychologists, behavioral scientists to then take that information and see how we can use it to change their behaviors. I've only listed a few techniques that really are nothing that make a difference that we can do in our everyday training. So you need to help your learners learn in the type of context in which they will have to remember the information they're learning, real life situations. We did a study using it's a folklorama here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's the longest running festival, and each pavilion consists of a different culture preparing different ethnic foods. And we did have a massive foodborne outbreak here that really sparked international news and sparked some interest in really changing the way we provided our training. Because the way we would provide our training, and these are all English as second language participants, we'd provide a PowerPoint course, 8 hours. Absolutely pointless. So my study was developing a hands-on food safety training program for English as second language participants. So what we did was we rented out a kitchen, a huge kitchen. We divided the participants in groups, and each station was a different food safety learning concept. So one would have to do with food, hand washing and hygiene. The other would have to do with how do you use the triple compartment sink, the other sanitizer, blah, 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 blah. And we would have real life examples. We would have show and tell materials. And each station only lasted 15 minutes. And it was engaged with pictures, videos, real life stories, using behavioral techniques. And specifically, it was all hands-on. So when we talk about triple compartment sink method, well, they did it. When we talked about how to use a thermometer, they did it. They used it. It's one thing to really, it's simple for us to say, how do you use a thermometer? How do you calibrate it and so on? It's another thing when they're trying to do it themselves. Okay, so everything, our whole program was hands-on. And in fact, I did implement this in different retail stores. Actually, when I was working for Sealed Air, a chemical company, we did this for Target stores. We piloted it for them. So we actually recreated a classroom into different stations, and everything was done hands-on with posters, instructional designs, and so on. And then using psychometrics to develop the proper questions was absolutely imperative. Now, if we can actually then supplement that by using the spacing technique, it's far more important. So after that training event, what we could possibly have done was wait a few more weeks and then have them take a micro little online course, really highlighting the 5 to 7 major concepts that they need to learn, and hence repeat on. That's how you implement the spacing technique, and this is how they're going to start to remember. So that was my study. I'm more than happy to share that study with you folks and how we did it and how we conducted that study and what the results were and some of the more interesting, innovative stuff that we're starting to come up with in this field. But please, if there is one thing I really want you to remember and reiterate is to implement the spacing effect for your training programs. Make it micro lessons. You'll see a vast difference. You'll see a very vast difference. I know we've implemented in my company and it's made a huge, huge difference. And it's so simple to apply it and to apply it. My apologies. Anyways, I do talk a lot. This is my information here on the side. That's my email address and my phone number. I'm not sure why I gave you my phone number, but feel free to call me anytime. Feel free also to email me at that email address if you have any further questions or if you're interested in reading my study or any other information that you should require, that you would require. I also have some links that I'd like to share with you folks too if you're interested. But again, a lot of this work was conducted by one of my favorite experts, Will Tallmeyer, and well, of course, Frank Yanis. He's the I guess he's the expert when it comes to food safety behavior and technique. So I encourage you to read that information. Wonderful. I hope I didn't talk too long. It's 45 minutes in. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Yep, perfect. If you can switch your webcam on, I'll get rid of the slides.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent presentation. Some
Thank
great
you, sir.
information. We do have some questions. Ignore my video if you can.
No.
From Edwin, how long should a training session last?
It all depends on the information, but when you do micro training or micro learning events, it can range from 5 minutes to 1 hour. But I would suggest not going over an hour. An hour is far more than enough. So between 5 minutes to an hour. It depends on the course, depends on the material that needs to be covered.
Okay. Question from Camillo. How would you recommend teaching workers that have learnt a process in certain way that they have problems adapting to a new or better methodology or process because they are afraid of moving away from their comfort zone or because they believe their way is better? Stubbornness, set in their ways.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and some people are. Well, I'll give you. I remember my mother. Just quick story. She was washing her turkey before she put it in the oven. Don't tell anybody. But I made the mistake, and she's old school Italian. I made the mistake that was the wrong thing to do, and she gave me a nice whack to the face, saying, "Don't tell me how to cook." And I'm like, "You're right, mother. You're right." So it's very difficult to change someone's behavior when they're really used to doing it in a certain practice. It's a matter of convincing. It's a matter of having your coach or your manager or whoever to really be on site with them to show them and to really do it with them. So you're not against them. You're actually doing it with them together to show the benefit of this is how it could possibly be done and what the benefits are. If there's no benefits, there's no point in doing it. So you have to really show the benefits of implementing that and to work with them, not against them. I think that's what's extremely important.
Yeah. Makes sense. Bryce, are there resources, guidance documents, or any academic materials that are recommended for using behavioral science in food safety?
Tons. My goodness, tons. And if you would be kind enough just to send me an email, I'd be more than happy to send you the link. There are lots, and the studies still continue to this day. There's the behavioral science part of it, behavioral food safety. Look at marketers. Look at what they're doing. It's absolutely incredible how innovative they are when it comes to relaying information. It's a really, really advanced technique. When you look at certain commercials or certain things, there is a technique that's involved. There's a lot that goes into it that will really, really really grasp your attention. So by all means, email me. I can provide you. There are many links.
Yeah, and just on that, we'll be following up after this webinar with the recording, a PDF copy of the slides that's got your contact details on. So
wonderful.
Okay, Leona, excellent presentation. We will be able to get a recording. Yes, I've just said that. Okay, Aberna. Will this methodology help in building up a good food safety culture?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you know that if you're conducting a training event, a lot of folks, what they'll do is they'll conduct a training event. It'll be a one-time event. They'll forget about it. If you continue to do it, you keep engaging your group. And they're going to keep being I don't want to use the word bombarded, but they're going to keep seeing certain messaging coming along during the repetitions that eventually, yes, it will build the culture because it's showing that you're taking the training seriously and you really want to implement these techniques to really make a difference. So inevitably, it will change the culture.
Yeah. Question from Keck. How to effectively train foreign workers who may not know the language as well?
Hands-on training. Absolutely. When we conducted the training with the English as second language participants, and I mean very English as second language, a lot of them couldn't even speak English. We did everything hands-on to show them this is how you do it. Otherwise, you'll have to do it in their own language, which is really not practical. So to do a hands-on modality of training and to really show them and have them do it is far more powerful than just showing them how to do it. So I would recommend highly hands-on, on-site training in the work environment and make a massive difference.
Okay, question from Justice. I tried reaping the same classes and part of the feedback I got was, and I quote, "We know all this, we did it 6 months ago. How does one approach this kind of a challenge?" Been there, done that. We've seen it all before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're always going to find the one or two that are going to do it. The problem is we know this works. The literature is very conclusive on this. We know this works. By doing this and by repeating certain messages, you may find the one or two that will have that concern. Okay, but really just send out a quiz. You'll see sometimes they really don't think they know the material, but they don't. Okay, so you'll always find one or two problematic individuals that may not want to abide by what your training program is, but by far, the masses will want to comply, and they're going to want to continue doing this because it's really important and it does work. So it's going to be hard to, it is hard to actually convince everybody, but at least you can get the majority.
Yeah. Okay, Ron, The Power of Consistency by Weldon Long. Is this the book you are talking about?
It is.
Okay.
And again, I can provide links to absolutely everything after the presentation.
Okay, yeah. And also somebody's asking, Irfan's asking for your LinkedIn profile.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. And I can even send you a clip of my TV show I did too, because it was only one season though. That was it.
Yeah, if you send straight after, if you can, while I'm preparing the recording, etc., if you can send some links, I'll put them in the email.
By all means. Yeah, by all means.
Okay, let's do that. Eleanor, uneducated factory workers are a very difficult group of people to educate. How would you go about people that did not finish school?
Mm-hmm. It is extremely difficult. When it comes to that type of audience, that type of group, again, you have to do a needs assessment. You have to assess your audience to determine what training is going to be the most impactful, because there's not one training model that's going to be the one all and all. So in that case, again, I'm going to reiterate and go back to hands-on on-site training. This is how they're going to learn. They're not going to remember certain concepts that you just deliver via PowerPoint presentation. That's not how they learn. And they've been far out of school for too long that it's just not going to work. So what I would highly recommend is have them do the hands-on work, the on-site hands-on work in the work environment. And again, I'm happy to share the paper on how we did it and how effective it actually was. And it's not rocket science. It's actually quite simple. Just get them to do it. And you're there as the coach to provide the additional coaching if they need.
Yeah.
But that's how I would recommend to conduct that training. No question.
Got you. Sarah, what is the most effective spacing for training? A few days, 1 week, 1 month?
That's very interesting because researchers are still trying to figure this out. So now we know that wider spacing is better in terms of memory retention. Now, in terms of wider spacing, what I would recommend, and it depends on the material itself and how long you actually want them to remember the information for, I would go no longer than maybe a week to 2 weeks. But again, the researchers are still looking into this. There is no answer, but we do know that wider spacing is better than narrow spacing. So space it out from at least a week to 2 weeks. With that spacing would be extremely beneficial. And for some reason, they really don't know why when it comes to neuroscience, but sleeping and then reiterating after the week really makes a great difference. For some reason, the way, I don't know what it is and they don't know, but having that sleep in between really, and I think we all are familiar with this. Before we have an exam, we study the night before. You wake up in the morning, as soon as you review the material, for some reason, it's almost encoded in our memory. So sleep has a huge factor to do with it. But I'd say a week to 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Is it okay to give the staff training materials and ask for them to present, especially for retraining?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
It's a good one. Question from Mary. Lots of great questions, by the way. We have implemented BRCGS recently and made changes on the process and GMP. We have a few employees are not happy with the changes and not following GMP all the time. How to deal with this? Yeah,
that's where we've had the same at our plant. We implemented FSSC 22000, but the same idea. And so, yeah, of course, you're always going to have that. You're always going to have that concern. So what we did was when we've increased, I'm not certain if you're familiar with Gemba walks or so on, we've increased Gemba walks, and we have not just the leaders implementing Gemba walk, we have the managers as well, and including some staff. And so what we would do is we'd go out and we'd do some more behavioral-based coaching, and we'd actually do some watching and coaching. And we would implement that in Gemba walks. We would implement that in huddles. So we reiterate certain information and explaining again, what I mentioned earlier, the why it's important to implement these changes. And really to be, as a manager, because I think it really does come from top down, to have the manager more engaged and provide that coaching on site. It's always going to be problematic. And if we knew how to deal with this situation, well, we'd all be out of a job, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Question from Valerie. I don't know if you've got any experience. Thoughts on alchemy training, that type of training?
No, not. I've heard of it. Yes. I'm assuming that's some sort of e-learning training or e-module learning training.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I do know of many companies, I won't say any names, but what they've done was they have realized that the spacing effect is so incredibly powerful that they've implemented in their training courses. Now, I'm not certain how Alchemy does it. If I recall, I think Alchemy has been adopted or taken over by Ecolab. I'm not certain. I think I had something sparking my memory there. But how they conduct the training, as long as they implement the spacing effect and they keep it engaging by using marketing, by using different instructional designs, that's what's important. And I know who does this well is the health and safety field. They do it well because I know a lot of companies, when they're providing e-learning modules in health and safety, that they've implemented the spacing effect. So they'll have their online course, which let's say it's an hour, then you're obliged to take a smaller snippet of a course 2 weeks later. And unless you finish those, and it's ongoing, and unless you finish those, you're not done the course. So it's absolutely powerful, and health and safety has done a great job. Food safety needs to, I think we need to do a better job there, but.
Okay. Ravi Kumar, some educated and uneducated CEOs do not support training. They say it's a waste of time. How to train senior management?
Yeah, this is where you need to develop a business case. I completely understand because I've worked for CEOs that are the same way. You need to create a business case because a lot of times what we tend to do is we implement training just to check the boxes off, right? Then when we finally start seeing the nonconformities and the noncompliances and what happens when we get those, then it kind of wakes the CEO up a little bit more. So they tend to be more reactive than proactive. So it's a matter of developing a business case where doing this type of training is not going to cost much more than the regular type of training that we deliver, but it's going to be far more impactful. And you can start seeing, and you start comparing, and you can start seeing how the nonconformities start to decrease and how powerful it actually is. So unfortunately, how CEOs work, because we're financially driven, is you need to develop a business case to say, this is what we're finding, how much it's going to save us in terms of cost, and so on, just by implementing something that really isn't an additional cost to the company. So we have to really develop a business case for them. That's how they think. It's difficult. It's
okay. Just want to say thanks to Kelly because there's been a couple of questions about what's a Gemba walk, but Kelly's put some information in there that explains it, which is great. Mickey, is there a better time for training? Morning, afternoon?
No, regardless. Doesn't matter if it's morning or afternoon. It's harder in the afternoon because if you're having a significant lunch, like I'm Italian, I eat a lot of pasta, you're going to fall asleep. So it's probably better in the morning, but it all depends.
Yeah. I'm a morning person as well, actually. Alok, how about taking tests after training the candidates we train?
Extremely important. Retrieval practice is how we remember. Now, I would suggest, and this is what, not me, this is what the researchers suggest, is when you're providing a training program, you start with the training, then you have in the middle a little quiz, okay? Just to recap a little bit more. That retrieval practice is extremely important because only after they've taken the quiz or the information that we can provide the feedback, which is incredibly important when it comes to learning. Then continue on with the training course and then have another final test or exam. But retrieval practice is extremely important when it comes to memory retention, but it's how we do it. Okay, and you have to provide the feedback afterwards, otherwise it's going to be ineffective.
Okay. Pradip, if a company owner does not follow the GMP, how can we manage this situation?
Yeah, that's extremely different. First of all, I love all these questions. This is so exciting for me. But yeah, if the company owner doesn't follow, well, then you've got a huge concern because for me, it goes from top down. They'll start to learn when the nonconformities and noncompliances start coming in or start trickling in, and they'll see what happens with their customers. But it's unfortunate because it always starts from the top down. So if you don't have that buy-in at the top, then your culture is going to go right down. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. Just on Gemba walks, just a little bit more. Do you follow a set plan, for example, or have a procedure, or do you just basically go there and go down to the workplace, talk, or do you have some sort of strategy or deliverables?
So the way I developed the Gemba Walk for our company, or for the plant that I work for here, I created an integrated Gemba Walk. So essentially my job prior to the one I'm currently doing now was integrated management systems. So implementing 9001, FSSC, 14001, all the ISO standards into one way conducting business. So the way we did Gemba was we included health safety, food safety, environment, and so on. But what I would do is before our Gemba Walk, which would be once a week with management, leaders sometimes, and most of the time leaders, management, and even staff, was I'd find out what training was conducted the week prior, and then I would take some of the major points from that training, and as soon as we connect the Gemba Walk, because you do a lot of talking with individuals and you're going out into the field and you're seeing what they're actually doing, is we would first reiterate the training, those highlighted points, some of the 4 or 5 most important things that should have been remembered from the training course prior. We always start with that. And then we continue on with our Gemba Walk. And we found that to be quite powerful and easy to do. Another thing we also did too, my apologies, but another thing we also did too is we developed a digital solution where when we did inspections or audits, everything was done digitally. But what I embedded in each one of these inspections, before they were to click on the inspection, a quick training reminder would come up. And they would have to read it and sign a commitment first. So depending on what training was conducted 1, 2, 3 weeks prior, that would pop up automatically in the training, or before they would even conduct an inspection or walk. They would be forced to see this again, sign that they read it, so you get that commitment, and then go ahead and do their inspection. And we found that helps. So little tricks, little things that you can implement.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Superb. I love it. I love it. So practical, a lot of great questions and a lot of knowledge and practical experience imparted there. So really appreciate you jumping in today and doing this first one. Have you enjoyed it?
Thank you. This was a wonderful experience for me. Thanks for everyone that attended. Simon, thanks for having me speak. And again, any questions, by all means, email me. I'm more happy to entertain.
Yeah, if you can fire me some links through, I'll add them into the follow-up email, and I'll be sorting out the 2024 Food Safety Fridays schedule for next year. So I'll be in touch with you, Rob. So appreciate your time today. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.
You as well. Thanks, everybody.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everyone. That's Rob Mancini. I've loaded your certificate in the sidebar. Follow up shortly with an email with the recording, the slides, certificate, and contact details for Rob and any other links that he provides. So I'll see you all on the next one. Have a great weekend and have fun. Take care.